And we are live for the First Strike podcast. Before we start the show, gotta plug our sponsor, FaceToFaceGames.com, the number one place to get your Magic the Gathering singles. Also, the place to get to read an upcoming article from a recent Magic Fest Grand Prix winner, but more on that later. The weekly deal, as we do one every week on Face to Face, is another spring sale, volume 3. This time it's going to be on supply and sealed products. So if you've been wanting to draft an old set, or it's the best time to get your sleeves. Once again, Dragon sleeves, a bunch of sleeves are on sale. So go to FaceToFaceGames.com right now and to go check that out. And also check the Facebook page, join the contest, and you can easily win $50 store credits. Today's show, we got Elliot back from the Magic Fest Niagara Falls. Got John, my man Final Nub, with a really sweet article that we'll get into. But we also got the most recent Legacy GP champion, someone who's known on the MTG world, Daniel Goetschel, in the house. How's it going, champ?
Hey, it's going pretty well. Thanks for having me on tonight.
We're super excited to have you on. And I'm just going to let John take it away, because John himself has worked with you on certain decks in the past, or so he tells me in our Facebook chat.
Yeah, it's really exciting to have Daniel here. For those who are a bit unfamiliar with his real name, he's been a mainstay as a MTGO end boss and the scourge of the online metagame, Gold Ducat, and he's posted a lot of results anywhere from playing like Legacy Miracles, blue-white decks, even Depth, etc., to like Modern Hollow One. And I've been talking to him a lot, and he has a lot of interesting ideas. And obviously, he's an excellent writer, and he's been streaming a bit more nowadays. And I just think he's a very good Magic mind. And obviously, he kind of crushed it this weekend. So very excited to have you, man.
Yeah, thanks. I actually met Jonathan the first time was through Bob Huang, because we were playing a lot of Hollow One back in February. It wasn't like super good, but we just liked playing the deck a lot because we like casting Goblin lore and stuff. And then Bob told me Jonathan was on it. We talked through the deck and stuff like that, which it's definitely an interesting deck to play.
Certainly. Just looking at your Goldfish list right now, Daniel, and you got a pretty diverse set of 5-0s here, anywhere from standard Golgari to Legacy Modern Burn, Modern Hollow One. And looking at your Legacy results here, you have anywhere from Blue Red Delver, Phoenix when it first came out, Death, Miracles, but I don't see a lot of the choice of the deck of choice for this weekend. So clearly, you have a lot of experience with the Legacy in the Legacy scene. So why don't you walk us through why did you pick Stoneblade? How did you arrive? And your general thoughts about your preparation and your thoughts about the metagame leading into the Grand Prix.
Basically, I arrived at the choice for a few reasons. The main way I got onto Stoneblade, it's definitely a deck that in the past year or so people haven't taken really seriously. So myself, I never looked at it that much. Like a lot of people are like Stoneforge, that card's not very good. But I know Omar Belden, who's a Toronto player. We teamed for like a 1K actually at Face to Face. The team trios. He said this looks fun. We should do it. So I was playing standard because I was mostly playing standard at that point. We had Tyler Nightingale on Modern, and Omar was on Legacy. So I was like, "What are you playing, Omar?" He's like, "Oh, Blade. Maybe I'll play Delver. Maybe I won't." And I don't remember if I said it exactly to him, but I said, well, actually, I think Delver is really bad in blue-white because the plows are the least scary plows you'll see. It's the least scary wastelands you see when people are just making you gain life. But then he actually ended up playing the event with Delvers in the sideboard. So I wanted to try that. The idea, I don't know, it's sort of like for combo decks to leverage your spell pierces, and you can side it in against miracles to trip them up a bit and pressure their removal spells. So I tried that, and I 5-0'd a league, so I thought, okay, this Blade deck's pretty good. And then I won a challenge, so I said, okay, this is kind of cool. But then I actually didn't do super well in 2 other events, so I was more nervous about it. There's like the playoffs thing. I lost 2 Tundra Mirrors to like Rich Shea and then to Tommy Steinerson. Steinerson's not like super well-known name, but he played in the Mox, which is like the Worlds of Moto, so it's really hard to get qualified for that. And then the PTQ. I played the PTQ and I didn't do super well, but I was playing like a really weird list with like Jace Vryn's Prodigy and Monarch lands. basically I made my deck way too hard to play. It was like playing chess. I just couldn't make decisions. I had to like play at random, and then it just didn't go well. But then basically the main thing that got me on the deck is well, after that I was playing a lot of blue red prowess because I wanted to play an easier deck so I wouldn't like make mistakes because of the whole, it's like the chess thing, when you have too many decisions you just play at random. But I was trying a lot of brews, like bad Grixis brews, like Grixis Pyromancer brews, and I tried a Grixis Delver brew with 4 Bobs and 4 Terramanders, and they weren't like bad, but they just didn't feel great. And then like I would just play the blue white blade deck. Actually, the Monday before, I just played on Moto, and I was doing super well. I went like 14 on 1 on Moto, like, and I was like, this just feels so much better than the Grixis decks. I think the main reason why it feels better than the other Ponder decks is just better against Chalice decks. It's not like inherently very good. It's not like you're gonna play Ponder Mirror and just crush them. It's more just like you have this protection from Chalice decks that the other decks do not have. It's not that the other decks are bad against Chalice decks, but if you're just trying to win a lot of matches in a row against them, you just have this initial like sort of like you have your deck's just better positioned against that basics thing. But I actually only played against one Chalice deck the whole weekend, so but it's still fine against the other decks, as I guess it turned out to be. So that was kind of my process for choosing the deck. It was basically like I wanted to play a Ponder deck or Depths, but I wanted to be good against Chalice, and I thought this was, the best against Chalice of all the fair decks. Basically, that's how I saw it.
Interesting here. Like, I'm going to go back a bit in time here, because like one of the most interesting trends in the last half year is the resurgence of the blue X2 color decks featuring back to basics, and that was kind of spurred by the Star City Games win for the blue-white Delver deck out of nowhere that had back to basics. And I've always thought that Plow and Delver is just don't mix and whatnot. And before that, right, like these like Stoneblade decks and these like blue-red, blue-white Delver decks, like they just weren't anywhere to be seen. We're too used to the greedy Grixis Delver, Deathrite Shaman era, like greedy mid-range decks, Dak Pile or Check Pile, etc. So what do you think that the move towards those is like solely because of the rise of like greedy land-based decks, or like why do you think like these decks are more viable now?
Well, I think during the Deathrite era, it was just really hard to not play Deathrite Shaman. So it really like homogenized the format. If you weren't playing Deathrite Shaman, you had to do some extreme stuff. I remember where right now the format's a lot more open. Like the power level of all the decks are, at least to me, it feels very similar. It's hard to have like a good choice or a bad choice. And now it's just like, now that the power level's a lot lower without Deathrite and Probe in the format, you just have a lot more space to try and, cast Stoneforge Mystic, because the next best, most powerful thing just isn't the same level as like, if people don't play a lot of Legacy, it might not sound that broken, but like when your opponent, I called it the like Boggle Leyline start, when you went turn 1 Deathrite with a Daze Up and you had a Wasteland, you would win like 90% plus of those games. Like your opponent just couldn't do anything at all. It might not seem that. And then like also you'd play Delver Mirrors and there's not that much removal, so it's really hard to actually kill this thing. And they can have like True Names and Pyromancers. They can't, like Deathrite was just an obscene card, and it really homogenized what you could do just in the format. And now you just have a lot more options to try and do stuff, and that just means lower power stuff like Stoneforge is more viable. And I like the Stoneforge because it's good against Chalice. And yeah, True Name doesn't work well with Plow, so people who read the list might be like, why are you playing for True Name? It's just like a combo with the equipment package, even though it sounds a bit silly. When you go like Curve Stoneforge into True Name, it can be powerful against the fair decks in the format.
Interesting. Before we go on here, like I just want to highlight the timeless classic now, the famous or infamous tournament report, the Bogus Reanimator report. This is Daniel's actually the author of that masterpiece here. So if anyone hasn't read it yet, go ahead. You should look up. I guess Bogus Brand Reanimator. It's a very good tournament report. Gives a lot of insight to how his mind works. It's great. But before we go on to like your tournament and Elliot's tournament on the weekend here, I kind of want to like touch on like for those that don't recognize you. It seems like you are. Do you live in Ontario right now?
Yeah, in Toronto.
Right. So you name drop Omar Belden and Nightingale, et cetera here, and like I think you know Edgar as well. So like Are you in the Toronto area, like knowing all those grinders?
Yeah. So I know them all from local face-to-face tournaments, and so we see each other at all those events and stuff.
That's pretty cool. And Edgar definitely, Edgar also top-aided as well with the Strifle special punishing deck pile as well. So it's been a great year for Canadian Magic, especially Ontario Magic. So I'm very happy to see you guys representing here.
Yeah, I actually Edgar the weekend before, because as I was saying, I was playing all those Bad Grixis brews. He saw it and benevolently messaged me and said, if I want to play like a Bad Grixis deck, he's been doing really well with a 4-color deck, but I just didn't really have the time to test the deck and get all the duels together because it was just a few days before the GP.
That's awesome. Yeah. Oh, you're flicking.
Yeah, sorry, I was flicking cards there. That's just something I usually do when I'm sitting at my computer. It was actually I'll show while I put them away now. I was flicking a Bowmat, a Remand, Dead Gone, and a Crackling Drake. So pretty fun legacy cards. Dead Gone has a lot of history. Was Omar Belden. He almost went undefeated at the Grand Prix last year playing this card. So it's a Grixis Delver pet card of ours.
Is that like against like Merit Lage?
Yeah, it's for Merit. It's basically so like you'd play it over Forked Bolt so that you can deal with Merit Lage.
Fair enough.
Well, we're touching on tech real quick. I do just want to ask a question about the list you ended up playing in the Grand Prix. It looks really, really stock to me, except the one thing that jumps out is the Tormod's Crypts in the sideboard, which obviously, like, if you're playing a mentor strategy, having a proactive card like that helps, but, with no mentors, what made you go towards Tormod's Crypt?
Well, it's actually kind of funny. It comes from sort of I dual queue a lot on the weekends, and it's a lot more difficult, even though it sounds kind of like a meme to use Surgical than Tormod's Crypt. Like if I have I'm playing the Legacy Challenge, and then there's like a standard PTQ and like a sealed Mox, and playing Surgical, there's even just the clicking, like it sounds very silly, but you have to like click on the Grizzleband, you have to remember to remove it. Like I'm like switching between 3 games, and it's so much easier to use Tormod's Crypt. It's good. That's like there's like several reasons. Like I wouldn't, obviously, if that was the only reason, I would play it at the GP. That's just like the first reason, so that people are like, okay, sounds kind of reasonable. The second reason is I think it's a better versus Dredge and Storm. I don't understand Storm super well, but most of the Storm pilots like say they fear Tormod's Crypt a lot. I played against 42 AD this weekend. He's like a Moto grinder, like Storm God, who's known for doing super weird stuff, like playing Pernicious Deeds, 61 cards, multiple tendrils, like the Ks. Like if you play against him, it's just terrifying because he always wants to go draw go, and you never know what he's up to. Against Dredge, it's obviously just a lot better. Well, there can be different situations with either is better, but I think generally it's better, especially they're like sideboarding 3 Silent Gravestones. One general argument people make is that Dredge just isn't a very popular deck, but it definitely shows that there's a couple pilots, Aurum 67 and Elf Kid, who do extremely well with Dredge. Maybe they're just really good and it doesn't matter what deck they're playing, but I do think that it's a very good deck. Probably, and I'd rather not lose to it when I beat it. And I thought, like at a Grand Prix at the top rounds, there's probably very good Dredge players potentially that I might have to play against. Also, I know Eric Landon, and he always tells me like Tormod's Crypt is terrible, a lot worse than Surgical. I think the main reason he says this against Plow decks, and I know he doesn't disagree with me, or I know he disagrees with me, is because when you Surgical Grizzlebrand, it's really hard for him to get relevant threats against Swords to Plowshares. But my problem is more with, or sort of the origin of how I started playing Tormod's Crypt was I was playing a lot of Blue-Red Prowess, and you just don't have relevant cards in hand. And basically, like, you only have Force of Will, so it's really hard to actually use Surgical and wait, because then they can just discard it. You don't have a lot of relevant cards. You don't have a ton of pressure. And also, you said Prowess. It's kind of it's not the mentor level of power, but you have Storm Chaser Mage and Swift Spear, and it is quite relevant when you have like 2 of those out. It's just like an extra shock. But it's just sort of like a pet card of mine. Like it's not necessary, but I like it a bit more in those matchups. I know Eric disagrees though against Black Red, but personally I feel it's quite strong. It's actually when they gave you they gave you a piece of paper when we top 8'd where you had to write like what's the strongest card in your deck. And I said, well, it depends on the matchup, but the card that I think I've probably won 100% of the games I've cast, well, not 100%, but the card that I probably have the highest % chance to win when I cast is Tormod's Crypt, because the matchups it's good against, it's so powerful. And even in Stoneblade, you do have a bit of that discard. You're not playing Miracles with infinite cantrips. You're playing like Stoneforges and True Names, so your hand can be more vulnerable to discard. It can be awkward if like your hand Snapcaster, they go like turn one Thoughtseize, your Tormod Crypt, now you have a dead Snapcaster, but there's a lot of variations. It can also be against Reanimator that can play through a Surgical easier in like some ways, but there's definitely ups and downs to each. It's not like objectively better. Like most of my choices just came to my play style. Even like I know Omar this weekend was splashing black, and I didn't not splash black because I thought it was worse. I just didn't. I didn't want to get wastelanded because that's just my personal playstyle. Like for fun, like I thought if I'm playing 15 rounds, I'm not going to have fun getting wastelanded. So I just wanted a simple mana base. That's also like why I excluded all the utility lands like Karakas, Wasteland, the Monarch land. I guess nobody plays that except for me anyway. But I just didn't want to get wastelanded just because it's my personal playstyle. So most of like the choices in the deck are just like the cards I like to play, sort of.
Super interesting. Clearly, like I really laughed at when you said the part of the reason why you did choose Surgical is because of the F6 value when you're multi-tabling. That's a mark of a true Magic Online grinder right there. I'm not gonna lie. Well done. Yeah, so I think most of us are here and curious to hear about both of you guys' weekend here. You guys both went to GP Niagara Falls. Obviously, no offense to Elliot, one of you guys did a bit better. But yeah, Daniel, tell us about your weekend. How to start? Any interesting spots? Just floor is yours to talk about how you did and how you got to. Did you just not lose? I think you were like 16-0 or like 16 concession or something like that.
Yeah, I scooped to Edgar because it wasn't actually a selfless scoop. I might have scooped anyway, but I didn't even have to think about it because basically what happened is if I scooped to him, he would be second seed, I would be first seed. The matchup's really bad for me. That way we don't play until the finals. So it actually sounds better. Like, I mean, I could have theoretically won the matchup, but I've never played it. But look, like reading his list, it seems quite bad for me. And also, I can't really, hope he misplays. He's quite a strong player. So yeah. There was a couple interesting moments. I mentioned 42 AD, the Storm Master. I've played against him a lot of Magic Online. There's definitely the funniest moments are against him. I'll just say to prelude to the game, it was probably correct for him to extirpate my Containment Priest. That happened in our game. And he's playing Storm, by the way, so it's not like he was Sneak and Show or Reanimator, which was I could actually tell that's I think that's probably the coolest play of the weekend, and it's the kind of stuff that only happens against people like 42 AD. Basically, what happened is so a few turns earlier in the game, I went Snapcaster and target Brainstorm. He's like, thanks, extirpate my Brainstorm. So he sees my whole deck and he sees I have two Containment Priests. I slide them in because basically I have True Names, which I think are slightly worse. There's obviously pros and cons to each, but like, and also for people who don't know, his play style is like super Drago. He tries to like play a bunch of tendrils and just naturally tendrils you, and he has pernicious deeds, and like his deck is super grindy. He's trying to out control you almost. He actually successfully pernicious deeded away a Batter Skull, a Tormod's Crypt, and a Stoneforge in our game, which anyway. So basically what had happened in the exact extirpate Containment Priest line is later in the game. So like so he sees I have two Containment Priests. He like abrupt decays one at some point or something. And then we're just like going draw go. He Thoughtseizes me and he sees my hands like True Name, like Flusterstorm, Force of Will, some counter spells and stuff. He passes back to me. And I draw for turn. I look at my draw and I pass back to him. And I have like enough lands out where I would obviously slam the True Name. The only draw that would make sense that I wouldn't play anything would be like Containment Priest. And I have one in the graveyard and he has an extirpate in hand. And he looks at me because I foolishly said, "Oh, I'm Gul Dukat. We play all the time." Because so he knows that when I play against him, I'm gonna jam my cards because I know he's trying to do this like meme stuff. Like we played game one, I went like jam turn 3 True Name, jam turn 4 Jace. Like I know what he's trying to do, and sort of and then So he looks, and then he ends up not casting it. I cast Containment Priest, and he makes like he's shaking his head. And then after the game, he says he was like almost 100% sure I do Containment Priest because I couldn't draw like Snapcaster and pass because he extirpated my Brainstorms, but he just thought it was like too weird. But that just definitely shows you like if you follow the narrative of the game, weird stuff can come up, and it's like yeah, they drew their one of Priest in the deck, and I could have extirpated it. It probably wouldn't have influenced the game, but I definitely thought it was very funny afterwards that that came up. I would say the other best moment was against Gerard Fabiano in the Swiss. He was playing Miracles and I was playing Blue White Stoneblade, and it's the end of his turn in game 1, and I go to cast Vendilion, flash it in. His mana base, he has like 4 lands out, like a Tundra, 2 islands, a fetch land, and his hand is like Spell, Snare, Counterbalance, Swords, like Force of Will, Snapcaster, Terminus. And so he didn't cast the Plow on my click. Well, I look at my hand, it's like Jitte and like some bad spells. I take the Plow, and I end up killing him with a Plow. And so that was a pretty tight rope to walk for that Vendilion from there. And that was probably the second best most interesting match of the weekend for my deck, or at least that felt like it was a tight rope to walk in that way.
Man, that 42 AD anecdote is very interesting because, like, clearly you got the 2 titans of the Magic Online world, and when you're so high up level 1, you guys are probably operating on level 5s and whatnot. You come out to these like really weird lines and all that. So I think that's a really fun spot to be in when both players know what they're doing here. So like what like. I wouldn't expect you to walk us through the Swiss and all that, but you didn't lose at all, and so I expect we'll hear more about that in your articles and whatnot. So, in your quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals here, I know that you faced off against Gerard Fabiano Miracles here. Obviously, quite a strong player. I'm more curious about that match because, like, my understanding is that Miracles is favored, but I was looking at Anurag Das's StarCraft texting Twitter coverage, which was very amusing. If no one saw, there was no coverage in the Legacy Grand Prix. However, Anurag Das, who is a very prominent figure in the Legacy scene, was on site and fiercely texting or typing, tweeting every single move, which was great. So I would highly recommend you check it out. So yeah, why don't you briefly walk us through your top 8 matches here? From what did you play in the quarterfinals, semi, and the finals? What were some interesting spots? And obviously you didn't lose, but yeah, we'd love to know more about how those went.
Well, I wanted to mention before I start one thing about Anurag Das. He's a friend of mine. We actually went to get dinner afterwards with a few of our friends, and when I saw him, I was walking after my match. Like I was just walking around the aisles waiting to start because Gerard, I think they had like a 2-hour match, and my match, I played against Show and Tell, so my match was like 20 minutes. So I was waiting there tensely for the top 4 match for a long time, and I saw Anurag was just typing on his phone because he actually, I don't know if you know, but a few months ago he emailed Channel Fireball and he said he wants to do video coverage, and they couldn't because there's like so much stuff going on. And then he said okay, and they said listen, we'll do text coverage. And then they weren't doing they were doing some, but they weren't doing like a ton or something. And he was like he really wanted to do more. And when I saw him doing it, I'm like he's got to be like delirious. Like how can he type for hours every play? I didn't expect the coverage to be high quality, but then when I was reading through the replays, it was actually like you could actually understand what was going on in the game just by reading the replays, which is hard to do because when you're playing a Legacy game, there's obviously so much going on. Like, how could you actually understand what's going on? But he really communicated it well, and like while typing quickly, it was just kind of absurd. Yeah, the most intense game is definitely versus Gerard in the top 4. Like I remember in the first game, I had to Force of Will his Swords to Plowshares, which isn't like a normal play that you'd usually want to do. But basically, what had happened was my hand was like Island, Plains, Plains. In play I had an island and a plains, and in my hand I had like plains, True Name, Jitte, Batterskull, Council's Judgment, Snapcaster, Force of Will, and my top card was bad. I knew it like from a cantrip. So basically, I go cast Stoneforge. The trigger goes on the stack. He's like, yeah, I plow. So that's why I said I had 2 equipment in hand. Like one of them I would get off this thing, and I have to think for a second. Also, I saw open deck list, so I saw it's 3 Spell Pierce. And basically, if I let this resolve, I couldn't actually use my hand to develop anything. Like I can't cast a True Name, even I don't have a plains. But even if I did, he could like force it and then like Spell Pierce my force. Like it would be hard to use the force without under a Spell Pierce. if I force this and he doesn't have a second plow, I can go like put the Batter Skull in play. If he like cantrips turn 2, finds a Snapcaster, then by turn 3 I can have like Jitte on my Stoneforge and like try and plow his Snapcaster. If I draw plow, which is like the worst card in my deck game 1. So if I don't draw plow, I'd be happy for that. So I end up doing that, and then I can basically keep using my mana to develop, shuffle my top bad card. And I kept doing like really weird plays. Like one of my friends, the guy who I roommated with, is Hans Jacob. He actually won the Eternal Weekend, I think, 2016 or just the year before this one. And he said when he was watching me play, it's like I look like a true modern Snapcaster player because I kept like timing Snapcaster. Like he would go cast Accumulated Knowledge, and I'd be like, in response, like cast Snapcaster Mage like at the end of my turn on like turn 3, just because I'm trying to keep sneaking all the Snapcaster Mages, and I would kept like doing stuff on his upkeep. So yeah, definitely. Well, it's interesting because when I was playing Blade, the blue-white Blade deck at first, I thought Miracles was like my worst matchup because you're playing a mirror match, but your threats are clunky and they just have accumulated knowledge. So like, how do you do anything? But people kept being like, no, it's fine for Blade. And I'm like, well, also one thing, it's way more losable than other matchups. Even if it's not like a bad matchup, the other matchups you don't need to jump through that many hoops. But basically, I just tried to play like a Destined Taxes deck and just try and like strangle his mana as much as possible, make him awkward for him to develop. But by doing that, I was basically just sneaking in Snapcasters as many times as I could, like so that he couldn't cast a Jace safely, and then I could try and cast my own Jace. I mean, that's just like a fancy way of saying I ended up forcing his Jace, and then my Jace is resolved. But that was sort of how I was approaching it. The matchup, it was definitely stressor. In game 2, it was he mulliganed to 5. So in my head, I'm like, okay. And I kept 7, but what ended up happening is like around turn 5 or 6, the board kind of stabilized, but he had like 1 or 2 cards in hand, and my hand was like Palace Jailer, Council's Judgment, like 2 or 3 counter spells, and my mana I had like 2 islands and a Tundra. But what ended up happening is I drew like three islands in a row and like a Flusterstorm, and he played a counterbalance and or something that like got through. Then he top decked it to Fairy. He cast it to Fairy. I go to Force of Will it. He line flips the Force of Will, and it passes back to me. So I had like probably like 3 to 6 turns where I could have just cast a Jailer. It would have easily resolved, but I kept drawing islands. And it was definitely, and I have like the councils in hand. I just draw like another fluster, and I have to pass back. I'm like, oh my god, now I have to go to game 3. But luckily, I ended up winning a really tight game 2. And game 3, basically, I cast a Jailer, and he ended up having a Snapcaster out. And I had like one turn where my only protection was like a Flusterstorm or something, and I tried to like really hope he couldn't like get rid of my Jailer and take back the Monarch. Like when he passed back, I was like such a big breath. I was like, yeah. And also that in the finals against Destined Taxes, my friends were saying like I was playing so slow, but when I equipped Jitte, it was so quick. Like all my game actions were like so super slow, just trying not to do anything wrong. But then like when I'm like, how many cards do you have in hand? They're like 0. It's like put Jitte, equip, attack in like 1 second. So yeah, that was interesting. And yeah, I mostly played a lot of Ponder mirrors, so it was pretty stressful. This deck, it's actually not particularly good against Delver decks. I mean, a lot of people were saying Delver's fine for you, but basically my experience is in game 1, you don't have a lot of removal. You have like 4 plow, which is the good removal, but you don't have like super many planes. I mean, you have a good amount of planes, but you're not always going to get a planes, and like super early at least, like on turn. But by super early, I mean like turn 1, and then so your threats aren't super good at stabilizing. That might sound weird to say, but like Stoneforge and True Name, when they're playing Daze and Lightning Bolt, it makes it so that when they have a threat and you can't kill it easily, and then they can like disrupt your like slow, clunky stabilizing things, it can be really hard to do anything. However, if their draw's not super aggressive or you have like a good draw, you can easily win too. And then I have 2 Supreme Verdicts in the sideboard that easily let me catch up from a lot of positions. I did play against a really weird Grixis Delver deck though in day 1, and my opponent actually X1'd. I played him in like round 4, I believe, and at the end of the day, he was at the top of the standings. And he actually had like basic Swamp and basic Island. So when we were going to game 2, I thought he was Blue-Black Shadow. But he had Niv-Magus Elemental and Colligan's Command and Snapcaster Mage and Jace the Mind Sculptor. And I actually remember in the 3rd game, I had it like a Jitte with a true name, and I thought it was like very far ahead. It would be difficult to lose. But then he actually casted Jace the Mind Sculptor, which made the game like I had to win on turn 5 of time in that game. I probably could have won 1 turn earlier. I was just playing super safe because I had like a click on a Jit on a click. And yeah, that was also a really tight game. Also, one funny moment too is I played against lands one time, and as I don't have surgical, a lot of my friends said, well, what do you do against lands? And I'm like, if I play against lands, I'll come up with a plan. my plan ended up being like they had a Maze of This, and I had like 4 1/2s, or like I had like a bunch of like squires, and they had a tabernacle, and I had to like pay 4 for every upkeep because of what else was I gonna do, and I just kept attacking with the 1/2s. It was an interesting plan to say the least, because even like the Maze of This was untapping like the only like Snapcast or whatever, but it ended up working. So yeah.
Man, I just love listening to talk about Magic. It's like clearly you're a very good and very methodical player here, and clearly a very deserving champion here. And as Carr alluded to or tweeted, we'll see your article.
Did John just freeze?
Yeah, I thought my internet crashed for a second, and I was getting a bit nervous.
As I said, I'm ecstatic. I think Keith said, well, your article will be up, but I think Keith told me possibly over the weekend or something like that. What's up next for you in terms of important tournaments? What's on the roadmap from
It's actually really funny because usually I play a lot of the Moto PTQs, right? And so usually when I'm like, okay, I'll play Moto on the weekend, I see the format for the PTQ, and then I start playing it, or like the mocks, like I play like limited stuff. And I'm like, okay, it's modern this week, I'll just play modern leagues, or it's standard this week, I guess I'll play standard leagues. But now that I'm actually queued for the PT in Barcelona, I guess I was looking at the Magic Online calendar, and it's like so empty. I guess I'm like, I wish this happened during the school year. Yeah. But so because it's like usually I grind leagues sort of like, you could say, like without a point, like I'm just playing leagues just because it's fun. But at least I'm like, okay, I'm preparing for this event. Well, now I guess I couldn't really play leagues. That's why I was like playing some more Cube than usual, and watching old so that was definitely interesting. But there's the Pro Tour, so I'll be going there. I heard it was Modern Horizons draft. I've never played a modern like I do play limited an okay amount. Like I like playing limited a lot, but I've never touched those master sets just because they're like so expensive. So I don't want to like learn the hard way or whatever. So it'll be interesting to try and learn with that. And actually, yeah, Edgar said maybe after the GP, he said maybe I could test a little bit with Team Face to Face, or just talk to him about through the drafter. I have a lot of friends too who can help. Actually, Draft Master Jarvis Hugh is a good friend of mine. We talk a lot about Legacy, so maybe he can help me with draft too a bit. So I have some people I know who can help me through. Like I do draft a lot, but it's not actually at a great level.
I think it was announced today or very recently. Elliot, correct me if I'm wrong, that it was turned into modern Barcelona. So what are you looking? I guess you'll be interested to see how this upcoming Mythic Championship plays out in London. And what would you be playing?
Well, what I've actually a spicy deck I've been playing modern recently. Well, it's not spicy. That's like this. It's just Grixis Shadow, but I had Blood Moons in my sideboard. So good thing Edgar's not here now. But I sent it to him, and he's like, "This is ridiculous. Are you trolling me or something?" Basically, well, the reasoning behind it was I was playing Grixis Shadow, just because it was like I like Hollow One a lot. I like those like I don't know. I like casting Gurmag Angler. Well, it's kind of funny. I don't know. I like casting those spells. I don't know. I really like Mishra's Bauble. I guess that's the truth. When I saw that they were playing 4 Mishra's Bauble, I'm like, okay, I got to give this a spin again. I love Mishra's Bauble. And so I don't know if it's like the best deck or whatever, but it was just like a deck I was liking to play a lot, and it seemed to do well enough. So I played it in like the Mox playoff. And I ended up going 3-3, which might sound bad, but for the Mox playoff, it's like very difficult players. So I was actually happy for a 3-3 in the events. And so basically the logic behind Blood Moon, it might be bad, I was just trying it, but usually you play like a couple, well, I basically took Sam Bardy's exact list, and in his sideboard he has 2 Collective Brutalities and a Disdainful Stroke. Well, I didn't expect a lot of burn at the Mox playoff. Actually, in January I played burn, and so did Javier and Elf Kid. And so back then I was like in love with burn. Right before the KCI ban, I was like, man, I'm gonna play burn forever in modern. It's like I actually like playing that deck a lot, and like I don't have to think about modern. I can just play burn. Then the KCI ban happened, and a lot changed to modern, like I guess. But anyway, so basically I cut the 2 brutalities, not because they're bad, but just I didn't expect a lot of burn at like a super high level event, but like at the Mox, where like for a Grand Prix you want cards to bring in against burn because a lot of people are going to be playing it there. So I was like, okay, I want 3 cards for big mana. And I was looking. First, I was playing like 2 Strokes and 1 Vendilion, but I wasn't really sure. It's also control. So I put like Amulet on blue-white control. You could count Esper maybe, sort of. I don't know if people are still playing that, but definitely blue-white's the deck people play. And I would say, okay, I kind of want a card for those matchups. And I was looking through the options. And I was thinking, well, Alpine Moon's really good against Tron. And when you say 1 Moon, I'm like, well, Blood Moon's like that, but it's also good against Amulet, and it's can be okay. Like if somebody shows up with Esper, maybe I can like somehow Mize a win. Or against blue white, it's not terrible. Though Teferi did make Moon a lot worse. I used to play a lot of blue white in Modern, and the fact that Teferi is just 1 blue, 1 white means you just wait one plains, 1 island, and you can just play Teferi and you're good. But before Teferi, Moon was a lot more stressful, and Moon is still good because you do care about colonnades, and it just can help get free wins in a matchup that I personally think it's hard. I know some people might disagree, but my brain's not big enough to consider blue white a buy for Grixis Shadow, I guess. Like I know some people might think it's a bit better in the matchup. I was just trying to think exactly. So I was just trying Blue Moon because of that, and it's obviously It was actually the most. I sent it to a friend of mine, and he's like, "Wow, Blood Moon in Death Shadow, that's cosmic." And I'm like, "No, what's more cosmic is I side out basic islands when I side Blood Moon." Because against Tron, especially under the new Mulligan rule, like it's really bad to have the basics, and they're more like a utility for like when you actually want to fetch them, but when your life total matters. But against a deck like Tron, for example, they're so powerful. You really just need to get something on the board. I don't know if it was correct, but like all my other cards were good, and I basically was the London Mulligan rule. You could more easily sculpt hands that you had lands. Plus, like the Sam Party list, you don't even have Serum Visions. You have very few blue cards, and I didn't have like Disdain. Yeah, in that list, I think I maybe had like 2 moons, 1 Disdainful Stroke, just because I didn't want to have like awkward boards where I drew 2 moons and then Oblivion Stone. I do have a lot of removal, but so that was kind of cool in Modern. But I try a bit of Amulet sometimes, but I actually used to play it like in 2015 when like Summer Bloom was legal. But I just get I don't know, I like playing Mishra's Baubles too much. I also play blue white, and blue white and black green. I can talk a little bit about those 2 decks. My problem was black green, and I actually played it I think the 5K in November. And it's actually kind of funny. I got wrecked by Hollow One. I started 4-0 or something, but then I lost 3 rounds to but the first one was to Hollow One. So maybe sometimes the way I pick decks is I'm like, what do I always lose to no matter what I play? I'm like, whatever I play, I always get wrecked by Hollow One. So that kind of got me started there. That's but anyway, so my main problem is black green is that it doesn't really have a way to deal with its own mana in a way. So to elaborate on that, a lot of decks that have Ancient Stirrings or Looting or like Bit Mishra's Bauble or like operate on low lands, they have all these ways of having mana sinks and like not stumbling on lands. Like, is it Phoenix? Was the serum? They just don't lose a lot of games where they stumble on lands. Where when I was playing black green, I'm like, a lot of the games I just stumble on lands. I draw too few or too many. I don't have any way to auto correct. I'm basically playing a standard deck, but I'm playing against modern decks. Like, it's like a fine deck, but you just lose so many games from that. And that actually happened, I think, in the finals versus Phoenix at one of the Star City Opens. I was watching it because I'm like, sweet Golgari, let's watch it take down some Phoenix. And then I tune in, and it's so sad to see he was just stuck on lands, but like a Field of Ruin and an Overgrown Tomb, and the Phoenix deck just beats him. But that's just like the consistency of those tier 1 decks, and that's what I would talk about the blue white quickly. Like, the thing in modern right now is like the tier 1 decks are just so consistently not drawing you that I think like the way that people would try and beat decks like Phoenix and is to outpower them. But the problem when you outpower them is you lose consistency. And then even though you're outpowering them some amount of the games, a lot of the games just aren't consistent enough. So I was like, well, it was actually funny. I was like, okay, so Phoenix is the best deck. Then I try and play Phoenix, and I realize, well, when people are trying to outpower you and you're playing 15 rounds, you're going to get outpowered even though you're more consistent than them. So, I mean, I think Phoenix is a good deck, but that was just the Phoenix deck is actually just too difficult for me, which is why I didn't play it. I think the deck's like extremely hard to play because you have the way you manage what you're doing in that deck is very hard. So that was one of the reasons I like Shadow, is more straightforward what I was doing. But yeah, that's why I like Shadow. Like it kind of has like a clear plan, like a clear nut draw in a way, like in the way that like Tron and the Whir deck does, and they're very consistent. So I do like blue white a lot. I was playing it with like 3 or 4 relics, and I had a lot of ideas I liked in the deck. It's kind of what sounds silly, but I was like, oh yeah, I'll play Gideon of the Trials. It's well positioned right now. Like that's the kind of I was like, and then I'm like, I look back, I'm like, what am I talking? Gideon of the Trials is well positioned. Like what? And Thirst for Knowledge and Relics main. But one of the problems was blue white. But I know some blue white players might disagree. It's just like, so all these tier 1 decks, they have these consistent net draws, and it's like at no cost. Like they're fine if they don't have them either. Well, in a way, because maybe your opponent net draws you and you lose. And the blue white deck, like I'm playing negate. Like you're sort of playing this like prison role in a sense where you're trying to lock out everything relevant your opponent's doing. But like playing cards like negate, it's so like high variance, like they can just do nothing or be absurd. And it definitely feels awkward to play with a card like that. There's also the fact that it's open deck list helps a lot, but the fact that like the London Mulligan lets you sculpt a hand, well, it's pretty awkward when you're trying to sculpt a hand and your cards are negate and supreme verdict. Which one do I want? So definitely the Mythic Championship, I think like Fatal Push removal spell decks are a lot better because you actually know if you want them or not. But it's super awkward to try and like the fact that you're sculpting a hand and then you don't even know a spell is good in the dark. Obviously, the fact that the open deck list I think will mean that these fair decks are way more viable than normal. Like, and so basically it was just like really hard. Like the blue white deck, while I'm looking, it's like what it doesn't like fold in the same way that green black does because you have like cantrips to sort of set up your land drops. But you're like, I was talking to my friend, I'm like, what's a net draw of blue white? And it was like casting one spell a turn, and it was like it's too hard for me to envision that game plan sort of like. But it's certainly a powerful deck. Like I seem to do okay with it, and Nassif seems to like it a lot. Though he likes surgical over relic, which I don't know. I like drawing cards maybe even more than him. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on modern. I'll definitely be interesting. Like I even talking about Cheerios. Actually, I mentioned Elliot earlier. It was kind of funny. He played Cheerios against me in the mock, and in game 2, he went like play 5 of my eggs out, and I'm like sure. He goes like retract my eggs. I didn't have a counter spell. I'm like sure. He goes play 5 of them again. Grape shot you. And I'm like wow, I just lost to Cheerios who's Grixis Shadow. I won game 3 though, but I was like that. I really had to work for that. I was really nervous. I'm like, if my life goes too low, he can just like, if he draws a grape shot and a retract, I don't have a counter spell. And he has stuff like silence, to tax me and all that stuff. So I know people are like really excited about Cheerios. There's a lot of decks people are, excited about under the London Mulligan rule. And it'll be interesting to see how the Pro Tour goes on. There's actually a mock preliminary I think like a couple of weeks ago or a week, I think it was this Friday. Yeah, it was actually this Friday. And Hollow One did really well. And I was actually kind of joking around. I said, look, with the new Mulligan rule with Hollow One, what happens is you get to sculpt your hand and then use Burning Inquiry and it disrupts their hand. Now, I don't know how much that will actually translate to how you win games, but it's just funny to say. And it's a cool deck. Actually, the only reason we stopped playing Hollow One is me and Bob. We were kind of like unsure about the Is It Phoenix matchup. And then when I played against Bob, and I think for like 2 hours, I like almost never lost a Hollow One. And we're just like, okay, if we can't beat Hollow One consistently, and we like tried a lot of stuff, like maybe it was a fine matchup, but I don't know. It was just like we found like we're jumping through too many hoops to beat it with the Hollow One deck, but I don't know. Well, right. But it obviously it still does well. Like other people were doing well. He won the Open with it. A Spanish grinder, I forget his name exactly, Arca Crema, I think. He like top 8 at a PTQ. He almost won. I think he like top 4 at it maybe. Or maybe even made it to the finals. I can't remember. So it still seemed, and it did really well in the Mox prelim. But so it'll be interesting. Actually, one funny thing. Apparently, a friend of mine. Well, I don't know if I can say it publicly, but it's about Slippery Boggles. He said he likes Slippery Boggles a lot. I hope I don't betray his trust, but he just couldn't beat Tron with it. He said he was like destroy, and I'm like, was the new Mulligan rule actually kind of makes sense? But I don't know if I should have said that. But I think he said he gave up on it because he couldn't beat Tron, and so yeah.
No, that makes sense, man. I'm excited to see how you do with that in Barcelona. It's like now, like not only do I think you have like a great mind for Legacy, you've got seems like you've got a lot of thoughts on Modern as well. So really to keep following you and how well you do.
But you said so. It's actually I didn't actually see the Barcelona format. I thought it was like standard and like it's actually Modern for the main event. So that'll be interesting, I guess. Yeah, definitely more of a standard player. Modern's a bit of a it's a lot more difficult. Like the way between losing and winning is a lot wider. Like you can like lose very hard in Modern, whereas in standard you at least, I don't know, I feel like you lose slightly less hard, if you pick a bad deck. So.
Daniel, thanks for coming on. Is there anyone you want to shout out quickly before we let you go?
Not really. I did the two people who, like, Omar was like the main guy who got me onto playing Blade, and then there would just be like a lot. And Anurag Das, obviously, for doing the live coverage, which was really nice. And then Thomas Metchin is just a French guy who also helped me before, basically, Omar wasn't playing like Jace the Mind Sculptor at first, and Metchin's a guy I know, and he was like playing 3 Jace, and I'm like, okay, I guess I'll play 3 Jace. And then Jace is very good, so yeah.
All right, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll be sure to check out your article. Thanks again, and hope you'll get you back on when you crush Barcelona or something.
Let's see. I'll just try and hopefully it'll be a good learning experience. So yeah.
Right. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
That was Magic Fest champion, Niagara Falls champion, Daniel Goetschel. Did I get it? Goetschel? Yeah. And man, lots of thoughts, John. This guy. That's why you were hyped about him. I mean, I need to re-listen to all that stuff once I have to prep for an event, because he had a variety of thoughts on. I don't know if you got a chance to hear them while you were off, on the different archetypes and the problems he saw with different versions of them. But let's go to Elliot quickly about his weekend, as he called his shot multiple times and once again came up empty. So what happened, Elliot?
I don't know if I came up empty on my called shot. I did declare I was going to X3, and that I was not sure if that would be a day 1 or day 2 finish. Unfortunately, it was a day 1 finish for me. I played depths in the main event, like the black-green slow depths, which I think is it's a very good deck. A few people had some really good results with it in the tournament, but it does have some holes in the format in terms of good matchups. It does want to play against some sort of specific things, which is not combo decks and death and taxes. And the combo decks and death and taxes is what I played against, which is the way things go sometimes in Modern and Legacy. A lot of times your matchups really define how well your tournament goes. I've been bragging to friends about how there was a game I lost where I went turn 1 Duress plus Surgical Extraction, turn 2 Hymn to Turok against my opponent's combo deck, and still died on turn 3. So, I mean, it's the way it goes sometimes. I had some bad matchups, and I, to be honest, didn't play that great on day 1. So a well-deserved X3 finish, playing less than 9 rounds, let's put it that way. But for the next day, I wanted to play the PTQ, which was Legacy as well, and I wasn't excited about playing depths, so I challenged someone who I drove there with to a best of 9 for the rights to his Force of Wills and Underground Seas, and I won that best of 9, so I got to play Death Shadow in the MCQ, and I had no experience playing Legacy Death Shadow, but I'd played quite a bit with modern Death Shadow decks over the years even, and having played something like 15 matches or so with Shadow between the MCQ and playing testing in the night before and such, what was really interesting to me is that when you play Death Shadow in Modern, it feels like it's a Legacy deck, because you have a ton of 1-mana interaction, cheap interaction, and your opponents are trying to cast sometimes 3 to 4 mana spells, and the average mana cost of your deck's like 1.2 or something like that. But then playing the Death Shadow deck in Legacy, it feels like a modern deck, because the play patterns are so much similar to the modern Death Shadow deck. And, you have a lot of similar cards to the other Legacy decks. You have the same, 8 cantrips, 4 forces, 4 dazes as the Delver decks have. But, having... So you're sort of attacking the format from a different angle in terms of, a Delver deck. Well, you are a Delver deck, but the other decks try to put like a True Name Nemesis into play, or have like a Stoneforge Mystic, and that's how they're attacking people. You're just trying to play one large creature and protect it with a bunch of protection as well. So I thought it was really interesting. In the PTQ, I ended up going 4-0, then losing my win into the top 8 against humans. The big weakness of the Death Shadow deck is I was playing 0 basic lands, and my opponent was playing 4 wastelands. So I got wastelanded twice a game, and I spent, I think, more turns in the match with 0 lands in play than I did with 1 land in play, 1 or more lands in play, and still both games were kind of close. So I think that Death Shadow is a really strong deck, is what I'm getting at, and I wish I could have gotten that one more win, see what happened in the top 8. But this weekend was not for me. Had a lot of fun, hung out with a lot of friends, and that's what Magic's all about. I love Magic for the Gathering.
Okay, we'll do a quick talk on John's article today. He's predicting, I think it's a bold statement in the article. He's predicting, I think, an Amulet Titan win. I don't have it right in front of me. But Elliot, what do you think about that? Well, what do you think about his thoughts on Amulet Titan taking the prize?
I think it's a pretty similar thing to when we were talking about the Mythic Invitational, where, you know, the odds that Amulet Titan wins the PT is what, 2%, 2.5%, maybe a little higher. But that might just be the highest of any of the modern decks. There's just so much variety, so many viable decks that, you know, you'd have to be listing decks for days, and so many things would have 0.01% even, and that's sort of noteworthy when you have a big tournament like this. So Amulet Titan, definitely one of the better decks, definitely a top contender. I don't know if I would go so far as to say it's a favorite to win the tournament, just because I think it's going to be relatively underrepresented compared to some of the other decks. Looking at things like Izzet Phoenix, Black, Green, and Tron, which I think are going to make up, you know, maybe a total of 25 to 30% of the meta between those 3 decks. So I think it's much more likely that Tron wins than Amulet, in my opinion, or at least maybe if you run the tournament like 100 times, Tron will win more often. But I mean, Amulet's powerful. Edgar's going to be there, and he can win anything apparently. So.
Right, John. I hope you didn't freeze again. Any okay? Any thoughts on what Elliot just said as I invite our last guest here?
No, Elliot's certainly right here. I was just, it's less of a bold, it's less of a bold prediction, more than, you know, I just wanted to emphasize and like just bring to attention how good Amulet Titan's going to be positioned at the Pro Tour here. Certainly, there's going to be, you know, as Elliot said, like Tron is a Phoenix Dredge, and Humans and Golgari. That probably makes like 30%, 40%. But relative to the metagame percentage, for example, I think, as I said in the article here, I think Tron will be the most represented. It's one of the easiest and most powerful thing that a professional can pick up in a short time if they don't have modern experience. And but Amulet, I think has good matchup against Dredge. It's almost a buy. It's got good matchup against a lot of the top tier decks, and I don't expect Blood Moon to be or Fast Combo to be that present. And you know, like the people who are very good, that are adept in modern, like Canister, for example, those guys will be the ones picking up and iterating on Amulet. And yeah, I just think that Amulet, despite its end barrier to entry, I think it's going to be a very good deck choice for London, and I think it's got as good of a chance as any other deck. Maybe not numerically, but you know what I'm saying.
I think the closest thing to a bold prediction I'd make about this, the metagame that we're going to see, is that a lot of people are going to end up playing just the deck that they're familiar with. I don't think we're going to see too much in the terms of like really deep metagaming. And I would bet a lot of money on the fact that there's not going to be anything akin to colorless Eldrazi, and maybe even not to that extent, but just in terms of, I don't think there's going to be a new kid on the block that's really shocking. I think that the majority of what we'll see is going to be things that we've seen dominating Modern for the past couple months, or really doing well in the Modern in the past couple months. A lot of people have been hyping up strategies that quote unquote take advantage of the London Mulligan rule, like and Serum Powder decks specifically. Like I think Serum Powder went from like a $2 card to a $12 card, and kind of made those numbers up, but it's definitely gone up in price. People have been excited to play Serum Powder, and I think that they're just going to fall flat. Like the London, there's people talking about playing like Simian Spirit Guide, Thalia, Chalice decks, and I know John, you mentioned those in your article as well. But I just think they're too gimmicky, and they're not going to hold up when it gets to 10 rounds of Modern at the highest level. I think it's going to boil down to, you're going to see Tron winning, you're going to see Phoenix winning, you're going to see some sort of Thoughtseize deck winning. That's the way Modern is, and the London Mulligan rule is not enough of a drastic change to make Goetschel brand playable. As sad as John might be to hear that, Goetschel brand, that's my take, 0 copies at the PT.
Breaks my heart. I do think one more thing here. I do think that open deck lists will make a difference, because like for a deck like Thalia, Stompy, for example, some decks Arbiters is killer, like against Valakut or Tron. Against some decks Chalice is great, against some decks Thalia is great, etc. So having the complete information before the match does make a difference. But Elliot does make a fair point. I think otherwise, but this is part of the fun, right? We make these predictions, and we'll see. We'll see what happens this weekend.
I definitely do agree. Having open deck lists does help a deck that's playing things like Chalice of the Void and Leonin Arbiter. It's part of the reason that I think that Black-Green and Thoughtseize decks are going to be prevalent, because you can make the same conclusion from, I know when to mulligan my Chalice hand or when to mulligan my Leonin Arbiter hand, with combinations of discard spells and creatures versus removal spells and creatures. I think that a lot of games that Black-Green will end up losing involve things like, you keep a Fatal Push a couple creatures and you end up playing against Ad Nauseam, or you keep a couple discard spells and one creature and you're playing against humans or something like that. Just kind of making things up as I go. But Black-Green decks will gain a lot, I think, and other decks will gain more from increasing their own consistency from doing the same thing, and decks like Black-Green will improve at increasing the consistency of their cards lining up well. And I just don't think that the Thalia, Chalice, Eldrazi decks gain enough in terms of power level by improving the lineup of their cards, if that makes sense to you. I think that, yes, turn 1 Chalice will be, less often played against something like Scapeshift, where it's a blank. But on the other hand, the rest of your cards kind of suck. Turn 3, 4, Thought-Knot Seers, kind of not quite modern power level. Leonin Arbiter without Ghost Quarter being a strip mine is not quite modern power level. So I think it's a no for me for those decks.
All right, for the last segment of the show, we got another guest with us. Travis, how's it going? Travis Somerville, am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, it's Somerville. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're perfect.
Great. Thanks for having me on.
I got to get you on to talk about MTG Xray, something you've been working on for a while. And at some point, I was talking to Travis privately that we may be doing like a more hands-on video later on this month, whenever. But I really wanted to get to know you, the man behind the project, what your goals are with the project, where you intend to take the project. So let's learn a bit about you. Like, how did you get into Magic? Let's start with that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So, unlike a lot of your guests that have made very high levels and very good results, I am a very average Magic player. I've been playing since 1994 in the Tempest era. Capsize was a cool card back then. Anyway, and so back then, I watched some of the best players play. I was at a tournament with John Finkel. Didn't even know who he was. It was just I was just doing it for fun. And then later, back in Kanza Tarkir, I got back into it, and for a few years now, I have a bad brewing habit. I'll show up at an F&M, brewed 1 hour before, And I've improved a lot since then. I put more practice in. Sorry, I just read the comments. Yeah, capsize can dash your hopes. But anyway, I started putting more time in it, listening to more podcasts like yours, and I've definitely gotten better. But I'm still not. I'm a wannabe. I want to be getting those pro points one day, or whatever we're going to call it in the future. But I started working about 4 years ago on a program that it would simulate the game. I've always been into making computer software, like when I play Dungeons and Dragons, like what happens when 2,000 elves fight 2,000 troglodytes, who wins, just been doing that since 6th grade. So it was just a natural extension for me one day to say, what if I could reprogram 80% of the game rules in Magic and just see what happens? So that's where it started.
Do you have a background in programming, or is this something that you've just completely learned on your own on your extra time?
Yeah, my first job out of college, I had my sociology degree. I saw some people programming. It was just a big startup time in Austin, Texas. And before you know it, if you were in Austin, Texas at that time, you just get sucked into the tech world. So I went back to college for a couple courses, but I'm basically self-trained, right? On that.
I mean, it's impressive. Like I know a bit of programming. I mean, I actually graduated in software engineering, but I wouldn't be able to get to the point where you actually have a finished product for people to download in the Microsoft Store. So even that alone is impressive to me, Travis.
I appreciate it. It's taken all my spare hours for the last 4 years. So, yeah. So I'm happy it's in the Microsoft Store too. We may deliver it other ways. We might start up a website and just have a link to it. I was publishing an Android app and an iPhone app as well. But with the amount of time I have, I've just cut back and just scaling back just to the Windows Store for right now.
Okay, so has this always been a solo project, or have you been working with other people?
Yeah, it started as a solo project, but I definitely have some really good teammates on the team now. Unfortunately, my coding partner couldn't come here. He worked all day. I call him Blue Mage, and Blue Mage will sit there and make a commander deck and play it against himself on like Cockatrice or cards or whatever, write down some stats, and he'll do that for about 40 hours at a time and then go to sleep. And I came over one day, I was like, wouldn't you just rather kind of work on this project with me and kind of help me automate some of this? And they said, yeah, this sounds like a good use of time. And that's all he said. And then he got to work. And, he's got an MIT degree and he's got a stack of algorithm books. And he just plucks, an algorithm here and there and has been applying it to the project for a couple of years now. And that's how we got to where we are now. It's got more technology in it than anybody needs. And what we really need to do is thank you for having me on the show. We need to have a few people just trying it for practical results and telling me, did it tune their mana to a pro level or not? There's some things it can do really well, and there's some things that it cannot do very well right now. So, we can get into, its strength and weakness anytime. It definitely has a bias, and it definitely doesn't solve all of Magic. It's just a tool.
So you answered one of my questions. You started off thinking, what would happen if you could simulate a bunch of games to help you solve certain questions, and right now it's the best at, let's say, figuring out maybe like your mana distribution and how much mana to put in a specific deck.
Yeah, it's if you have settled on your spells and you're just wondering what mana you should polish this off with, the approach is this isn't condoned by Frank Karsten, but it's similar to his methods, right? Frank Karsten will set up an experiment a lot saying, we're going to play this many turns. Here's the parameters. Here's how I'm measuring the optimal deck. And I ran, 1 million games, and that's enough math to feel very confident within plus or minus that this is the right mana base, right? That would be something Frank Karsten can do. So I wanted to set out and put a tool in everybody's hands that you get control over your deck building decisions. And so we'll describe that, on another time, but you are in complete control what cards have to be in the deck and which pool of cards might go in your deck. And then there's something called quantitative annealing. It's like if you could just play a game and write down how well your deck did and give it a score. Like in this case, we write down how much mana you played out. So if you do a 1-drop and then a 2-drop and then your game was over, you would have played 3 units of mana. Or if you got to if you made it to play to turn 7 and you managed to do 21 units of mana, right? That would be your score. And so if you played, say, 1 million games like that, well, even if you played 5,000 games like that, and then you shuffled what was in your deck a little bit and replayed them and measured them against each other, that's what quantitative annealing is. It searches through chaotic space of a lot of deck building decisions, and the results are pretty surprising when it comes to mana. I would trust this with all my decks I would take to a tournament, and then I would test it still. And then if you still felt like you needed to make a change. But it's a good scientific starting base that goes a little bit beyond hypergeometric calculations for sure.
Are you saying the general idea is for it to maximize the mana use over like X amount of turns?
Yeah, it's a little bit more complex than that, but like at a high level summary, that's it. But there's a lot of theory. You wouldn't believe how much theory you could apply to goldfishing, how much room there is to solve for the goldfishing space. Like for instance, what if you also factor in curve, like the amount of mana you use per turn? What if that's important to you too? You could then have a cumulative factorial of like how much mana you laid out times the square of, your curve and all that. And you can come up with some really interesting shapes to your deck. Another thing that's really important to the tool is if you're going to goldfish, how many turns are you going to play out? If you tell it to optimize to 4 turns, your mana base is going to look very different than if you tell it on average, I think this matchup is going to need to play about 8 turns. You would be surprised how different the mana choices could be.
So I think the challenge to get people to use it, like you said, is to make it as easy as possible. And I think like you've told me that you've gotten it to be able to import and export arena decks, and I think that's going to go a long way as a feature to get people to use it.
Yeah, I mean, this is really best as a tool sitting on your desktop, and you're probably going to do constructed with it. You could still learn a lot from seeing what it does on limited decks that you bring back home or something. But yeah, you could go find a deck list on your site. There's some fairly standard deck list formats besides Arena that it can import. And so that part's very painless. Once you get to know the tool, like, I mean, I know it like the back of my hand, of course, but there's only really 4 buttons to push. We'll go over that. There's just 4 buttons. And once you know what those buttons are doing, you'll realize why it's saving you time.
Okay, sweet. So what's up next for you on this project? I think we talked about a website coming up. Is there a key feature you're looking forward to hammering down with your partner?
Yeah. So, I mean, right now, I want everybody to know, I think it's very valuable to go check your mana base. You go take a net deck or some brew idea that's totally yours. I think it's really good just to run the mana function. But we're working on mulligan functions. Of course, we'd like to do a London mulligan function to help people practice. There is a mulligan function in the app right now. It's the UI is a little kooky, but it's quite interesting and usable. There's a little mulligan game you can play. One of the big features we want to release next is like a budget brew. So if you can imagine, we're optimizing a deck for mana and curve, and then also which set of cards you're thinking about putting in. But in addition to that, if you wanted to manage another dimension, like let's keep it to a certain budget, that gets a little bit difficult for humans to do when you add that many dimensions in. So like for your show, if you wanted to come up with some budget decks and constrain like a $100 modern deck and just see what it comes. Well, it doesn't do modern yet, right? So that's the other problem. We're stuck in standard land, but we're thinking about like maybe you could put how many arena tickets you want to spend and what your deck's looking like to try to figure out maybe what's the next 2 cards you should spend your rares on as a budget function as well.
Whoa. Yeah, I haven't even thought about this potential idea. Whoa. That's interesting. But I'm also interested to hear you say that, Travis, because when I chatted with you, I felt like the tool would be at its best, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, like at its best in limited, but you said it the inverse, because in limited, I care. I feel like the cards will tend to line up more with the mana that they cost, whereas in constructed, it's more situational based on how much mana is a card worth. And I feel like, and curving out, I really want to do that in limited way more.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It definitely could help you solve limited, hands down. There's no doubt about it. There are some features that we want to get to help it be more realistic for constructed. I think there are some features in there right now. Like for instance, if a card is very important to you to cast in a constructed deck or a limited deck, there's a star rating system, 0 to 10. And if you were to pump negate up really high, because you need to hold negate up on turn 2, that is possible to tweak that in the build right now. You could use the interface for that. What I'd like to get is to get to a place where it competes against other decks and understands the interactions a little bit more. Like if you're holding negate and there's no target for negate, then if you took your control deck and played it against an aggro deck and you put a bunch of negates in that build and there wasn't much to negate, it would be able to understand that there wasn't much value in negate in that build, and it could start to bend it a little bit and say maybe a few less of those is better. So I want to get to the level where we have interactions between 2 decks probably before your audience at their level is going to really think this is great for brewing. But I sure would like them to try and just kind of check the mana base a little bit. There's a lot of knobs and dials you can tweak and to get some pretty realistic results, even though it's not perfect.
Yeah, man, if you ever take it to that level, what if they interact? I think that's going to be bonkers. That's going to be a game changer, in my opinion. I don't think anyone's. I mean, like once we get to the point where we can get like an AI playing against itself at any even a reasonable level, it's going to be a huge game changer.
Yeah, but that might be a little ways off. But but my coding partner and I do like to sit around and watch AlphaGo YouTube channels and try to figure out what we can get from that. But I want to emphasize this is a tool where you always be in control, and the goal of the tool is to give you ideas and to help you learn. It's not necessarily to give you the final answer. It's just a tool that's going to probably float some pretty good ideas by you that you'll see over time, I believe.
So when you're talking about negate, am I right to assume like your system will look at like whether a land comes into play untapped or not, and it values like making sure it has 2 lands untapped for negate? Is that how it works?
Yeah. So this is kind of interesting. The game. Okay. So in general, we have the game rules, and I read in a list of cards, and it can read pretty accurately, that a Llanowar Elf taps for 1 green mana. It understands that Llanowar Elf has summoning sickness in general. It can read most of the lands, but what we do is we go in and hand program each piece of mana. So the pain lands, the shock, the fetch lands, all that stuff, evolving wilds, we actually write the functions out very carefully and test those. I mean, I'm sure you'll find a bug in my code. You can watch it play games. There's a section in the app where you can watch it. I'm sure you'll catch something. But we're really careful with the pieces of mana. So all your lands in standard, all your lockets, all that stuff works. And for those lands where you pay 2 life, we kind of have to put in an algorithm of, depending on what your estimated life total is at that point in the game, would you likely to do that or not? So it's not perfect because it's not playing against an opponent, but it's a rough approximation.
Yeah, I think you can make reasonable assumptions. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, and we do kill off creatures in the game at a certain rate, just an arbitrary rate. So mana dorks still die and your creatures still die. But if we ever get to the level of just interacting against another deck, what we'll do is we'll take the actual probability that your creature could have been bolted, and each turn it might get bolted just from a probability of being bolted, So just to add a little realism. For instance, we get interested in cards. So like what would be interesting is if maybe I come on your Discord community and listen to some cards people want programmed or a deck idea. I mean, just floating this by you. Like we could go program that set of cards. Like we did that for Approach of the Second Sun when that was a popular deck. And we came up with a very tuned Approach of the Second Sun deck. I thought it was quite remarkable. So we could do that for a deck if we applied ourselves for like a week. So just putting that out there. If couldn't do that for everybody, but if you tell me who to do that for, I'll apply my time for.
Sweet. Yeah. So again, I can't wait to do the hands-on with you, Trav. So where's the website going to be at?
It's going to be mtgxray.com. I mean, if you go there right now, you'll see a bunch of fake articles that aren't out there. We're pretty close. We're trying an experiment where you don't have to download the app. And if you have like a Chrome browser with a lot of memory, you can maybe run the app right there in your browser. That's kind of experimental. But really the easiest way to get a hold of this app is just go to the Microsoft store. And the reason why I don't just give people zip copies, I'll send you a zip copy of the executable. But people get real leery about that. They're like, how do I know there's not a virus? So if you go to the store, it's a known entity, and it's a clean copy that you can trust.
All right, perfect. John, as someone that's like really math lover, does this pique your interest?
I think I'm definitely short on the fundamentals in terms of color requirements, casting spells in a timely manner, ratios, etc., etc. So perhaps like I'd have to see like the actual product and how it works here, but yeah, perhaps it's going to be a useful thing here. The concept is definitely something that piqued my interest.
I talked to LSV about it one time. He said he won't only be interested if I programmed every card in Standard. So I'm going to make it our goal to program every card in Standard and have that updated.
What? When you tweet at him, or how'd you get in touch with him?
I was in GP Houston, and I had to wait several hours to talk to him and Marshall Sutcliffe, and they like the idea too. But what I want to really put in people's hands, you know what? I right after we get off this podcast, I'll do a couple fresh, updated YouTube videos. I really need to refresh my video to show you some of the features. So just search YouTube for MTG Xray. I'll do that tonight. I'd like to show off some of the. There is a score button when you score your deck. Then you can click on any card, and what you will see is very detailed statistics on how often that card is in your opening hand, and if it wasn't in your opening hand, what turn would you play it on? If it wasn't in your opening hand, when would you naturally draw it in your first copy in the game, and what turn would you likely play it on? And I've come up with a concept called the color tax. And so I'm going to try to make that more prominent in the app. But if you imagine if you had a perfect mana base and you weren't getting color screwed, your card might naturally come down on 4.3, on average after 1,000 games, right? Just from the other cards you're playing and just from when you actually get enough lands to play it, right? It might be somewhere between turn 4 and 5. But when you take the realities of trying to do the color cost, if you see that shift like 0.7 or something, you're almost losing a whole turn due to color screw and that you're getting a little too greedy, right? So I'm going to try to come up with some statistics so that you build your own deck, you score it, but you can get some very detailed stuff that would be hard to know otherwise. Because we all use hypergeometric math to say what's the probability of this card or that, but it's really hard to take into account somebody like Captain Lannery Storm. It's a 2/2, comes down. If the probability that you get to attack with it, you get a treasure token. How do you put that in a hypergeometric calculator? It's really hard. So simulating, I think, is really the best way to get that last layer of realism. Even though it's not perfect. I mean, it's not playing the cards out like you would. If you saw how it played the cards out, that's why most people that are pro level are going to reject this and go, I don't believe in it. But I still think you should look at the results, even though they're come about in a different way. And that's why I want feedback. I want people to look at it and say, no, it just doesn't seem right, and we can tweak it.
But how does it have? How can you give it a score? Like, the part I'm confused about, Travis, is like, does it have all the standard stuff now, or like, does it score based on what?
So it understands the casting costs of all the standard cards right now, and it understands what they are, like a land or a creature. I don't have to program any of that. I've got a generalized way of understanding that.
Okay.
But yeah.
LSB wanted it to be like everything to be simulated. I just wanted to understand the distinction of what he wanted.
Yeah. So like take a card like what is the card? Two in a blue, draw 2 cards.
Divination.
Yeah, divination. Thanks. So like divination needs to be programmed, right? You play divination. It's a do nothing card for the board state. So in our scoring, we give that a 0, and we actually program divination to actually draw you 2 cards. So if that actually helps you in the game because you got more cards in your hand or you needed that land or whatever, great. So we tend to program all the blue cards, and we don't have it 100% covered. Like, so if we just get a little feedback and little people using it, I think we could hunker down and get all those cards programmed in standard, which you have to do, and we have opt programmed, and our scry is not going to be as good as your intelligent scrying, but we do the basics of, like, we have analysis of whether you feel like you're shy on land or need spells, and it at least just does that. And it's pretty intelligent about the order of playing lands. So,
alrighty. Well, we're gonna wind this down. Trav, thanks for coming on, and I hope to do something else with you later on. And for everyone who supports the show, check out patreon.com/firststrike. Check out our episode next week, where hopefully we get Derek back on to talk about his London experience. And I think that will do it for our show. Again, Trev, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right. That was Travis Somerville. And for Elliot, John, and I, that was a long-winded episode of all different kinds of content. And we will see you next week. Ciao, everyone.